Hey everyone, welcome to our third podcast on the Rhino. Unfortunately, the bat is had a personal appointment, so he had to run out. Today we got on our podcast a guest. We have Professor Graeme Warham. Graeme is a lecturer in the Department of Information Systems and Analysis and serves as a faculty director for the MS program in Supply Chain Management at the Levy School of Business in Santa Clara. Graeme, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much, John.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Of course. Also, on a quick side note, Graeme was also one of my old professors that I had, so it's going to be really fun to kind of quiz him on his importance, his knowledge. So I guess the first question is, how'd you get into business?
So I had a bunch of startups at one point, and I got basically really run over by 9/11.
Okay.
So I lost 3 startups at that point, and then I got a teaching gig at Florida Atlantic University. So I had previously taught in industrial engineering and systems engineering departments at Purdue and at the University of Pretoria. So my PhD is in industrial and systems engineering. And so I was in Florida at the time, and this is in Boca Raton, Florida. And this teaching gig opened up, and I grabbed it, and I ended up sticking around for about 10 years. So that was the entry. So I really didn't have a business background. It was, I was the analytics and the operations management are closely related to industrial engineering. So that was why I was hired.
Cool. So why did you pick information system and analytics and like supply chain analysis instead of like finance or starting a VC or something else?
So actually, I've done all of those 3. I have done about. So it's hard to say exactly how many startups one does because some of them fail pretty early. Or you need to leave the idea early on, but maybe about 5.
Okay.
Obviously, never had a 7 or 8 figure sale, but they're very interesting to work on. I've also taught finance at Florida Atlantic. I was teaching the CASES course, the capstone course for the undergrads in finance. I have the Chartered Financial Analyst credential, and I also did a master's later in finance to kind of sort of understand the culture. When I first got to Florida Atlantic, I was an engineer, right? And I discovered a sort of a cultural gap. So and they were funding a master's degree, so I signed up for the MSF program, and I finished it in about 2.5, 3 years. So that was actually how I got my traction with business, was through the finance program.
Cool. How can someone who may not have an engineering or a science degree get into your field?
So there's really no requirement for any specific background to do business.
Right.
Are you referring specifically to like supply chain management or analytics?
Yes.
So, I think it's a myth that you need formal education. There are a lot of paths now that are experiential, where if somebody's got the willpower and the smarts, just the staying power to do maybe a nano degree or something, do some coursework on Coursera, volunteer, perhaps do a lot of meetups, get some connections.
Right.
You can learn the coding skills. You can learn the analytics skills quite easily with a lot of tools that are out there. So you'll find a lot of folks in the MBA program in particular who do not have a STEM background, STEM or engineering background. And they come in through a variety of channels. Really, sometimes I sit down and listen to CEOs talk, and I marvel how they've got sociology, anthropology, history, English, classics, all kinds of backgrounds, and yet they're leaders of Fortune 500 firms, have C-suite positions, and so there's really nothing that says you have to be a STEM background person to make it in business. Particularly if you're doing a startup, if you have the right ideas and you have the go, and you surround yourself with some good people, you can build a really powerhouse company. So I don't equate success in business with having a STEM background in any shape or form.
So would you say, but on the other hand, if I had or someone had a STEM background, he or she could have an edge over the competition, correct?
Not necessarily. So this is, generalizing here is kind of dangerous because I'm going to run into counterexamples left and right.
Okay.
But you'll find that folks generally head into engineering for a variety of reasons, and one of which is they like the numbers, right, in some shape or form. And so they tend to get into more of the technical side of things, which might lead to technical management, but that doesn't automatically sort of promote your abilities in general management.
Okay.
So that's why, it really depends on the persona. When you look at the folks that tend to emerge as successfully in business, it's got to do with business acumen, ability to work the economics, the finances, as well as the people skills. So the being highly numerate is an advantage, but you can't not have the other skills. And if you're missing any one of those pieces, most likely you're not going to come out at the top.
Cool. That's actually interesting. I never really thought about that before.
Yep.
So I guess the next question would be like, since you have your master's and PhD from Purdue in industrial engineering, and then you mentioned that you have your master's in finance from Florida Atlantic, and actually in my research, I ended up seeing that you got your BA in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you combine all of your degrees into teaching the rest of my classmates, teaching like business to the next generation, if you would?
So, you pick up different things along the way, right? It could be a degree, it could be a job, and you learn certain skills, and you onboard for the long term. Whatever it is that you actually do on board.
Right.
We're a curious mix of our past experiences. Some are more important than others. I think that the master's in finance served a role in kind of acclimating me to business thinking, and I needed that.
Mm-hmm.
Without it, I would have been more engineer than business person. The reason I went and did the BA in philosophy was I was I'd never done a course in philosophy of science, and I had lingering questions around sort of the ultimate foundations of statistics and science in general. So I started working on a couple of courses. I decided I'll take a couple of courses in philosophy, and I did them, and it kind of just pricked my interest, and I decided I was going to, try and do courses on modern and early modern and late modern philosophy. And by the time I'd done, 6 or 7, I was just about 3 or 4 away from getting another undergrad. So it wasn't like it's a 4-year program. So let's be clear. I only had to do
Okay.
10 classes to finish it.
Okay.
And,
So it was kind of like a happy little accident, if you would.
yeah, it was a happy accident. But I think to go back to your question about how that contributes, I think having that understanding of, particularly in the quants class that you took, I think it's very helpful to be able to contextualize. So you might remember me referring to David Hume
Mm-hmm.
and the problem of induction. So that would be something that I picked up or really read deeply about in that program. So there's a few artifacts here and there that really stick and just allow you to bring context to why are we doing this particular project versus that in a particular way, and it just fills in some of the gaps that I had personally had. So I went all the way through a PhD in engineering without doing a course in philosophy of science. I mean, that was my fault because I never took the opportunity that were presented, but they were also never sort of mandated. So there you were, PhD, but no philosophy of science.
Mm-hmm. So who's your favorite philosopher?
My favorite philosopher. Wow. That'll be somebody who changes over time. I would say, so my current favorite philosopher is Slavoj Zizek.
Is that
He's he's basically let's say he works in he's got at the intersection of a lot of things, but he's interested in socialism and psychology. So let me just leave it there.
Oh, okay.
And historically, wow, I mean, I spent a lot of time on Nietzsche and also on Kant. So I'm not sure that I found favorites, but I read a lot of them.
All right.
These are ideas, right? It's not the people behind them. It's really working with the ideas and seeing if you get traction and seeing where they lead you.
Cool. Cool. So how do you think business will change in the future? Like, obviously today's socialism, or not socialism, but the society here in Silicon Valley is pretty unique to Silicon Valley. And if you
Mhm.
compare that to New York City, which is obviously the financial capital of the U.S., how would you think business will not only be here in Silicon Valley, but as a country as a whole?
I don't know what the changes in Silicon Valley are going to be. I don't really think much about evolution of business.
Hmm.
What I think, the major influence is obviously going to be COVID-19.
Right.
And what I think is going to happen is there's going to be a rethinking of a lot of service industries.
Mhm.
How that is going to domino into tech and other industries is going to be the question and the subject of the imagination and the creativity and innovation of people in the Bay and elsewhere. I think we're actually in a long ride here, trying to stay safe. I think we're going to get hurt by wave after wave of infection if we don't pay attention to the safety aspects. I
Right.
absolutely appreciate the economic risks and the risk of starvation and dying. I'm reading stories from across the world, and it's clear that you can die of starvation as well as the virus, right? So there's a balancing of these interests, but it requires actually a very interesting move, because a lot of us are becoming sort of like operations managers. When you do a course in operations management, for a lot of people in the past, it was like, oh, wow, I never thought about how lines form at service stations, or at service points. And because of all of the minutia that we face in terms of infection, am I going to wear a mask? How many door handles am I going to touch on the way out of the building? Are you sitting 6 feet away from me right now? Has my keyboard been touched by anybody since I went to the bathroom? Small but enormously consequential concerns. And how we think through these things is actually going to sort of return us to value considerations that we're just not accustomed to making. And I think this first layer of getting safe is critical, and safe, not in an absolute way, because I don't think that's going to be possible. But then, like the next layers that come out of this, how do I make my supply chain safer, more resilient? Am I going to multi-source these chains, or am I going to still rely on very long supply chains that are actually difficult to operate because they're so lengthy? Or am I going to sort of do more local work in my supply chain? So it's
Right.
particularly the physical piece of business that I think is going to, or could be, heavily impacted. I just don't know how it's going to play out.
Okay. Seems like the supply chain will change accordingly to the virus that's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm offering a course with Tim Harris in the summer. Tim is a former COO of Seagate,
Hmm.
hard
Awesome.
hard drive manufacturer.
Right.
And we're busy putting together the course and reading a lot to try and figure out how we're going to pivot with that course, because if you try and teach the supply chains of old, they feel a little stale at this point.
Right.
Folks are leaning into this question very heavily, and if you look at professional groups like the Institute for Supply Chain Management, they're actually surveying all of their members currently, trying to figure out what these COVID-19 impacts are, and trying to figure out what lessons are emerging. So it's a case of stay tuned and be as innovative as possible to try and make these chains more resilient. So at the
Right.
end of the day, we've got certain needs, and we need them to be reliably met. And I think some of the medical supply chains have been found wanting. I think that's clear.
Right.
Capacities. I think we're going to build in more buffer and more um, cushion, so that if we have volatility in demand for whatever reason, not just COVID, that we can handle it. That we've got more, equipment and materials and whatnot in the pipeline than we may need at any one point, and maybe we just pay up. Maybe maybe life becomes more expensive because we're going to be paying for the ability to address earthquakes, tsunamis, and so forth, pandemics and so forth more effectively when they hit. It seems like we've dodged from one crisis to the next, wildfires to floods to this and that, and it's almost like, oh wow, this is a big surprise, but then the surprise sort of is allowed to wash through everything else, and maybe we need to be more deliberate about limiting those effects. So yeah, of course it would be a surprise if we had wildfires right now, but if we had all the protocols and the supply chain in place, and we can kick it in, and it won't hurt us so badly.
That's pretty interesting. Like how technology and supply chains will change depending on the insert issue, if you would.
Yeah.
Um,
I think what would be very interesting would be to hear, commentary from companies like Netflix, Comcast, Zoom, on how they've had to scale up, and
right.
clearly with the huge hit in loads that has been delivered, and how did that happen? Why didn't we see much of a blip in our Comcast or Zoom radar? I know that Zoom had some security issues, but it wasn't really necessarily a quality of service issue. I know that some have had issues there, but I'd be very interested to hear commentary from the folks who work on infrastructure at these firms to talk to this issue.
So, talking about Netflix and Comcast and Zoom, how do you think they will respond to, or in the future, for if something like a bigger pandemic were to come down the pipeline? If you like, obviously, I'm not wishing you for it, but if another pandemic or a worse pandemic happens, what do you think they'll do? Adjust?
So I think that they've adjusted. I don't think there's any more demand that's really outstanding, right? I think they're pretty much serving everything that has been
Right.
fed on. So I think they're ready to go. What I'm worried about is agriculture, healthcare. I mean, there the gaps seem far more drastic, right? Because I think I think most of us have experienced shortage of grocery items.
Toilet paper.
Well, there's that, but I think that's come back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that people are going to have toilet paper supplies are going to last until end of the century, most likely, right? Discover how
Pretty
much.
much with what people have stockpiled now, I think it'll last till the end of time.
Yeah, right.
So I guess the last question for right now is how will business shape the future?
How will business shape the future? So business is the place where things get done to advance our lives. So everything is structured as a business,
Right.
whether it's healthcare or education. Everything is in some shape or form structured as a business. So you've got ideas, and then business is the way that ideas become reality.
Mm-hmm.
At least in out with the ethos and the value systems that we have in the U.S. So business is going to go wherever the needs go. It's demand driven. So again, it's just whatever we as a nation, we as a species want to go, and the demands we place, business will follow, and business is going to be there to try and satisfy those needs.
Cool.
And reward the people that do the best job of rewarding the needs.
That's pretty interesting. I guess the only other question is like, do you out of all the companies you worked for over your work history, which one was your favorite? And number one, number two is which one did you have the most experience from working there?
So absolutely, and this is not just because I'm currently at Santa Clara, but Santa Clara has been the employer of my life. I came out of a work environment that was pretty frosty. The collegial relationships were struggling because of various leadership challenges that the place had. And I encountered the value systems of Santa Clara, and it was also a very small campus compared to other employers that I'd been with.
Right.
So the conversations with students, with faculty, with administrators, tends to be close. Although it's not a tiny employer, it's a relatively small employer, and it's pretty tightly knit. And you can have sustained relationships with students where they come in, they take a class, and they take a second, and that sort of repeat business is enormously helpful to building a sense of there's a web of meaning that kind of comes from it. It's also not just financially oriented, so it's not just a paycheck. There's a couple of organizations at Santa Clara that have meant a lot to me. One is the Ignatian Center, and the other is the Markula Center for Applied Ethics. So it's the first time I've really worked for a firm that has an ethos that is active, that people grow inside, and that actually sort of steers the firm overall. It's not just a bunch of people pulling within the scope of their narrow contracts, but there's a sort of like an overall direction to where people are headed. And when you decide issues, then that direction actually provides guidance. If there were contentious choices, you'll often find that at Santa Clara you've got the ethos is actually like the ruling consideration. And I think the fact that it's underwritten or underpinned by the Jesuits, who literally have put everything on the line. I mean, they've committed their lives to this cause. Kind of brings gravity to it. Many Jesuits have given their lives in the name of the cause, and I think that sort of gives like an ultimate gravitas to the ethos. So I personally have enjoyed tremendous growth within the Santa. I've been at Santa Clara 5 years, and all I would have is applause if when I draw the final line there, because it's been very helpful to me.
Cool. You mentioned ethos a lot during this conversation. How does one remain ethical while in the business world, instead of all of a sudden becoming, I guess, developing a negative reputation, like Bernie Madoff, for example?
Well, there are three pieces to, so it depends on how you want to launch from this. If I look at a normal, from a business perspective, I'll give you this one. The triple bottom line argues that there are financial interests, profit motives. There's also the planet, and there are people. And if we only follow the profit motive, you may end up in a situation like the individual you mentioned.
Right.
If you're bringing awareness to all three simultaneously, where you're worried about us as a people moving forward, where you do not allow yourself to sort of like stoop into partisan discussions that kind of destroy the ability of the people overall to move forward coherently. I'm not saying that I have solutions here, but I'm just saying that I think the triple bottom line, becoming aware of that, factoring all considerations. Profit alone can lead you into poor choices.
Right.
But choices that kind of respect all of these three tend to be choices that will get you ahead, kind of irrespective of the conditions. I think the reputational piece is really important. So at a personal level, just being kind and compassionate and trying to figure out if there's adjustments that are possible on your side that could help others, that tends to get reciprocated. People are aware of that. And, people are wherever they are for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people are in a bad place because they've been abused and whatnot in their past. And there are ways to redeem everybody, basically. So being sensitive to possibilities for achieving that, I think is key. I think the most important skill in the business manager's arsenal is leadership. Without leadership, things just become chaotic. You start having folks pulling in different directions. Presuming that profit is going to sort of unify everybody is not a good move, in my opinion. And being deliberate about socializing what the objectives are, understanding that at times you're going to have to make choices that are short-term losses, looking at the long game. and sort of keeping all thoughts, not just rushing to meet some milestone at the expense of everything else, I think is going to be a key move.
All right. So would it be fair for me to say that if you only focus on profits, you'll end up losing more than you have gained?
You know, short-term profit gain is the market's reward. Stock price reward is a reward for short-term financial performance. But I think what we're seeing right now in the markets is you can lose the firm altogether if you haven't built in resilience. So right here is a lesson.
Right.
I can't see it. The other thing that we haven't really addressed, we talked about COVID-19 because it's right in our face.
Right.
But there's, by some counts, a climate crisis brewing. And when we're done with a pandemic, it could be that we turn the corner and find something else staring us in the face, and it's the climate issues. So folks that are sort of setting up to do this obviously could be losing some ground financially, but you've just planned it out so that your company makes it through the next 10 years or 25 years instead of just like the next 14 months or something. So I'm currently interested in risk management, and we're actually in discussing this among the faculty to see what can be done programmatically, course-wise, and so forth, to offer some thinking, some courses in this to expand on this whole idea of the long game.
Cool. So from this discussion, it seems like there's a lot of information out there that anyone could use to get, and we just have to be careful and smart about how we play it.
Absolutely right. Yep. Great summary.
Yeah, unfortunately, my generation, at least, and the younger generation after me, is only like, let me put in $5 into the stock market and try to become a multi-billionaire like Warren Buffett. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's very stupid of them and us.
Well, systematic investments are by some counts a good move.
Right.
The entry points are important, obviously. And I think that the stock market serves a very important role. So it is a place for speculators, and speculation is a way of improving your price discovery on securities in the market. So there's a role for speculators, and that's fine, and they tend to get rewarded well because they're taking higher risk. But there's also the need for folks to sort of systematically invest their earnings and their savings in vehicles other than just savings instruments. So I think that the stock market probably is going to be around forever, quote unquote, and it serves a very useful role as a way of preserving value.
Cool.
But it can also go through depressions, right?
Right. Obviously, we had the Great Recession about 10 years ago, and obviously the Great Depression about 100 years ago.
What are your thoughts on, are we in the greatest depression right now, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, in my opinion, at least, obviously, just for the record, I have a very narrow-minded business knowledge. But in my opinion, that I think we're definitely moving towards a recession, if not a depression. Just because it seems like people are using money that they have when they really don't, and going to college and burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars for a degree that's basically worth as much as a toilet paper roll.
Well, I wouldn't say that, maybe in strict financial terms, but a degree program brings you skills, life skills that you carry with you for your life.
Right.
Instead of ways of addressing problems. So I think education is a fundamental value, and I wouldn't, whether the cost of education is correct or appropriate is another question, but education per se is the way we address our risks, right? When we don't know how to do something, we learn about it and we fix whatever it is we think we need to fix.
Just for the record, I'm not saying education is horrible or anything. I'm just saying certain degrees don't need to be a college degree. That's possible.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, in some of the advising roles I do, I'm encouraging folks to pick up additional courses, on EDX, Coursera. These just happen to be two of the platforms, but I think there's a lot of interesting stuff out there offered through a lot of institutions.
Right.
And you can actually augment, your formal program very convincingly. Another line of attack is to go to a lot of meetups and just get into the conversations and maybe volunteer as well, so that just those conversations can be life-changing. Sometimes you start hearing everybody's kind of aligned on the same message, and it's not the one you've heard before, and it gets you thinking, and then you research it, and off you go. Maybe you got a whole new career direction.
Yeah, that's what I've experienced over my lifetime.
Yeah.
People get one degree in college and then make a left turn or a few left turns and then end up somewhere else.
Yeah. It's common to, we start studying in our tertiary education at a fairly young age in some ways. I don't want to make that sound condescending, but
Right.
we're starting this out at maybe 18, maybe 19, maybe later. And things can change, right? So what you love at that point, maybe you don't love when you finish your degree, and then the master's is in a different direction. I think there's a broad need for lifelong learning. I think particularly as you get older, maintaining relevant skill sets is key, and that is one of the reasons that I've continued to do degrees. And I think the sort of the proliferation of relatively compact programs of study through like these nano degrees, online masters, allows us to sort of pace it to whatever we can handle, and pick up skills that are sort of emerging, because tech just keeps rolling, right? So there's no way of prepping at age 22 for the rest of your life. It's just never going to happen.
Yeah, like I always say, technology, at least, well, whatever is new, considered new today, will be old tomorrow.
Yep.
So I guess that's it. To the audience, thank you for watching this show. As always, links are in the description box down below. Graeme, do you have any last words?
Appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you now, John.
Of course.
Much.
Again, thank you for being here, Graeme. Much appreciated to you.
Yeah, sure thing.
To my audience, have a good one. See you in the next video. Peace.